and I wrote a poem in memory of Grandma that I would like to read. It's called Margaret Left. Filling her home with fresh-baked bread, making jam, what a loving farmstead. Sowing kindness, sharing a meal, an open door was her ideal. Friendship with children, teaching and fun, sewing, reading, adventures begun. Sharing sorrows, singing praise, hymns with friends on rainy days. Making cards, keeping in touch, she knew the secret of loving much. What she loved most, I'll give you a clue. Next to Jesus, Margaret loved you.
From Margaret, Bergen. First was the importance of family. Whether immediate or extended, we were all important and made to feel special. Nothing brought her more joy than spending time with her family. There was always an open door, figuratively and literally. I remember going to bed at night, wake up in the morning to various family members who had arrived during the night and were sleeping on couches on the floor. Those have
So I had 3 children in rapid succession. Margaret told George that she thought she could help me out by offering to take the children every Thursday to give me a much-needed break.
There is nothing so bad that we can't talk about it. Never any judgment, just listen and love.
We love you, Mom.
The first thing I ever said to Margaret before I fell in love with Rick is, "You'd be an awesome mother-in-law." As Leah said, we nailed it. She was an awesome mother-in-law. So true. But Margaret also became one of my best friends. So she saw us, she listened, she encouraged us, and she cheered us on. In 29 years of missionary service, Margaret only told us not to go back one time, and that was in June. Whew. And she said it quite a few times, just don't go back, you can get a better job, she said. But when I walked back in July after I just left, because the doctor told us to come home, she said, "Now you're catching on." She just never complained. Even when she fell a month ago and got 2 black eyes, she smiled from down on the floor and said, "I'm good, I think I'll just rest a while." and smiled. But then I was like, "Okay, if you wait any longer, we have to call the ambulance." I said, "Oh, don't do that." So then I said, "Do you want to go to the Rose Room?" "Oh, let's do that." So we got up and went to the Rose Room. I told her that if churches had more people like her, they'd be filled because people would feel noticed and cared for. On her last trip to the Rose Room, when walking and talking was really, really hard, she all of a sudden got the attention of a cashier behind the till. And she beckoned her over and then she whispered, "Are you new here?" I'm not sure she ever preached a sermon, but as her church announced in their announcements when she passed, she lived and had the DNA of Jesus.
And as I was thinking and praying about what I could share, there's only one story. Mom had this gift, they've been saying, of making outliers or people that were hidden or unseen feel seen. And so that applied to her family too, but it wasn't without its struggles. And so Mom was a gifted artist, and she was good with words, and she was beautiful as a young person, and that continued through her life. And so she could be a part of the in crowd, but she could also notice these outliers and go and be their friend. So she had that ability to walk in both of those worlds. And so even in this church, she was part of the, who helped decide how the Sunday school programs could be better and part of that group, but she was also part of the fringe because they also felt available or special, or that she was part of them. And so all parents want their kids to grow up to be awesome or perfect, and my parents were the same. And I was the firstborn, and so in grade 2, I was 7 years old. I won a contest at this church. Who could invite the most friends to Sunday school? It was a different building then, a cement basement, a wooden white building, or a cement white building. And I brought 22 friends over the period of whatever weeks. The next one, I think, was 7. And that was thanks to Mom's coaching. She did kids club at home, and she was part of the Sunday school here. And so during Rose here, her husband took me on an airplane ride. I was 7 years old. That was the prize. And there's just so many roots and memories here. But But a lot of that involved Mom. But so I loved being a model child until I didn't. And then I went the other way with smoking and drinking, and that wasn't good for them because that conflicted. Partly, of course, they were discouraged because of the harm that would bring me. These lifestyles aren't good for people, but also it wasn't good for them either as pillars in the church. And there was meetings about that. I think sometimes they weren't even invited to those meetings. So that's a conflict. And so this can't happen in our home, etc. I was 17 years old, so I finally quit school and left home. And I went to the Crow's Nest Pass for a couple of years. I would come back occasionally, but to see my friends. But later, my sister doesn't even remember me really spending time with Mom and her and Dad. I would go see my friends, even though they were cleaning the house for me and making it special. And anyways, I ended up in the Yukon, and I didn't come home for 2 years. So finally, after I came home, after 2 years, 2 more years, so I was 21 by then, but I was smoking cigarettes and living a worldly lifestyle. That wasn't okay with their lifestyle, but they decided that would be okay for me. So they said, do you smoke? And of course they knew I smoked. And so they said, you can smoke at our kitchen table. They put an ashtray on the table during supper time. It just seems so weird now because nobody does that. But back in those days, any restaurant, any airplane, everybody. But anyway, so they put the ashtray on the table. I never did smoke in the house, but I did smoke in the driveway. But that was an example of living in both worlds. You can be a part of something, and you can include others, and because you include them doesn't mean you endorse everything they do. That just means you love God by loving people. And it's a slippery slope because if you love those people, you could become like them. Jesus said, I'll send you out like sheep among the wolves. It's a risky land. You know, you can see Solomon went off the rails with that. But there is a place of walking with Jesus if you spend enough time with him. Jesus himself was able to model this perfectly. So I see Mom growing in that area. So then I went back up to the Yukon, and I never remembered any correction about that, but God was certainly correcting me. So recently, one of our daughters was caring for Mom right at the end of her life there and just spending some extra time, and she saw Mom's prayer journal. I haven't even confirmed this, but I heard this. And there's my brother's name and my sister's name, but my name wasn't there in the list there. And she said, well, where's Dad's name? She said, in the early years I prayed so much for your dad, I'm just trying to balance it out a bit. So there's other things going on besides the ashtray on the table. So that's my story. So at the end of her life, Mom's body kind of quit. Like it slowly, I thought we'd be coming home and taking care of her for hopefully a long time, 3 months, 6 months. We didn't know, a year, more. But as her body stopped working, eventually she quit eating. But she kept being cheerful, like it's already been mentioned. But then one day, about 3 days in, she just didn't even want a piece of ice on her lips or her tongue anymore at all. She was still cheerful, but her body just quit. It just became less and less. Her spirit was still there and her emotions, but her body was stopped working. And it just slowly stopped. It didn't stop like all at once. But then, so he was going, do you want a teaspoon of water on your tongue or a little ice cube or something? And then she said, I think it's over. But it was like she's thinking out loud about her journey, about life. And that really struck me, because none of us signed up to have a life. None of us got to choose where we'd be born. None of us, but we all got signed up. We're all in the journey. And then we got these choices. And now it was almost like, I don't think she was surprised, but it was like she was just coming to grips with it. Because she was always real positive, But after she hadn't eaten or drank for 3 days, and then she lived 5 more days, and she just kept being comfortable. We tried to do some stuff. She didn't want anything, but I think it's over.
And as her life radiated this message, I find myself wanting to be all the more like that too.
I'm Daryl. I'm Marlene's husband, and Margaret was my mother-in-law. When I first met George and Margaret, the thing that scared me the most was when I came up the stairs. Right away, I saw a huge bouquet of red roses. I thought to myself, oh, the bar is really high. Like, I've bought flowers before, but never like that. So that kind of intimidated me. As a suitor looking for a bride, I was always nervous to meet my potential father-in-law, but it was Margaret, actually, that gave me all the hard questions. Her primary concern was, though, that I loved the Lord and that everything was good and would be bonus after that. So we had a long discussion, I remember, downstairs on the couch and all these questions and whatever, but it was actually really good. And it was nice to see that Marlene's mom actually cared about those things, so we were a good fit. Marlene told me one time that people showed up in our driveway at dinner time, and they'd actually finished making supper, and they were kind of cleaning up. And Margaret says to Marlene, quick, put a pot of water on the stove so it looks like we're just starting supper, and we'll invite them in.
All of my friends, I was sitting in school, I think I was in grade 3, I was 8 years old. I was sitting in my classroom, and all of my friends were talking about our grandmas, and they were all saying how strict their grandmas were, and blah, blah, blah. Their grandma won't let them do this, won't let them do that. And I just piped up, well, my grandma, if I want to go into the fridge and if I want to take a bun and put icing on it and sprinkles, my grandma doesn't care. My grandma is better than your grandma, and everybody wanted to come to my grandma's house. And then I couldn't think of one memory, so my second one, as I got older, I started going to visit grandma on my own. And so often I'd go have tea with grandma or go have lunch. I bought a Camaro this summer, and so oftentimes I would have to tell grandma, all right, grandma, it's time for me to go. I must go milk the cows, and I have to drive away in my Camaro. And she got quite a kick out of that. And then towards the very end, I got to take her for one Camaro ride. So that was quite fun.
Grandma jumped on the tramp with me, and Grandma let me break rules. Grandma let me leave my shoes on the tramp, and when we were baking together, Grandma let me eat brown sugar straight. Grandma did not care if I made a mess, and Grandma gave Mom dirty looks when Mom got mad at me.
When I was a little kid, I used to spend the day at her house, and I remember I would always make a list of everything we were going to do that day, and one of those things was painting Hot Wheels. She would cover the table with newspaper while I would go put on an old shirt from the dress-up box, and we would begin to paint. I always loved doing this because it was something special I could do only with my grandma at her house, because she would let us do basically anything.
Grandma would take us out and introduce us to the fairies in the backyard forest and in the garden. And other kids grew out of believing in fairies, and they would say, oh, it's kid stuff, and I'm growing up now. And I would say, okay, but an adult introduced me to fairies, and so I know it's real because Grandma told me about this. And even as adults, Grandma would always say, well, of course magic doesn't really exist, but a world with a bit of magic is just so much more fun.
I have so many memories of Grandma, but she was sincere and she was kind and she was loving, but she was also a little bit cheeky sometimes. So if you follow Dad's blog, you'll know there hasn't been a whole awful lot of guys in the last 10 years. But anyways, I brought home Zach recently to Grandma, and we've been dating for about a month and a half, and we were picking her up to go to Easter. And then as we get outside her building, Grandma's like, oh, it's Zach, right? So I thought it was dementia. So I was like, oh yeah, this is Zach. And she's like, it's just so hard to keep all of these boys straight. Straight face, goes to get in the car, then turns around, long pause. Oh, kidding. Where are you now, Grandma? And then another time, she was complaining recently, she's only got one great-grandchild. So she's like, I have one great-grandchild and one picture of him. And I'm like, Grandma, I printed you 5 pictures of him last time I came. She's like, I don't want pictures, I want more great-grandkids. So one day, Grandma, you can look down from heaven.
I don't know how many of you have ever tried Grandma's scones, but I lived with her for 9 years and I ate a lot of her scones. So about, 6 years ago, I was like, okay, Grandma, not to be awkward, but you are getting up there. I should probably learn how to make these really epic scones. She's like, okay, so we get our 2 bowls out. We make the exact same scones. I copy her move for move. We put them out on the table. Everybody could guess which were hers and which were mine, and I don't know how. But then, so I gave up that dream for a bit, and then COVID hit, and I couldn't visit her, so I'm like,
okay, I need to learn how to make these scones. So I would FaceTime her, and I'd make them a lot because COVID, what else was there to do? So I made a lot of scones. So I'd call her 2 times a week, hey Grandma, what's your recipe? The 4th time I call her, she's like, Annie, just Google it. It's the first recipe on the internet. I'm like, seriously? And I'm like, oh, okay, thanks, Grandma. So I did, I Googled it, and now I have it written out. And so now it's like all, gross, and it has egg on it or whatever, and it's on my fridge, but it looks really, like, official and old. So now I'm keeping that, because that was, I love Grandma, and she loves Google, so.
The first memory was sitting at my armchair in the living room while living with Grandma and Grandpa. In the mornings I would have devotions, and very often my devotions would line up with Grandma and Grandpa who were sitting in the kitchen, and they would read a daily passage. And I would often start my devotion by opening my Bible, and even though we were in different rooms, I could hear everything that was being said, so I would open my Bible, and then I would hear Grandma read to Grandpa the passage. And then Grandma would maybe ask Grandpa a question, and he would answer with maybe 1 or 2 words. And then Grandma would talk about the day. And then I would zone out, and I would start reading my own Bible. So that was a very fun memory that happened many times. And I knew in the moment to cherish it. And then the second memory that many people have mentioned is flowers. So arranging bouquets and taking care of bouquets. And while we lived with Grandma, 4 girls and Grandma, we got our fair amount of bouquets. And without a doubt, it was always Grandma's responsibility to take care of all the bouquets. And she would make sure they always looked good. She would throw them out if they needed to be thrown out. And she would wash the stems and trim them and throw away the dead ones. And one time I asked her, Grandma, how do you know when to throw away flowers? Because don't you feel bad throwing away like a bouquet? When do you know? When is it time? And she just said, flowers should never look worse than you feel. Which is great advice, because if you're having a really bad week, you can have bad flowers in your house, and that's okay. But I was always really grateful that Grandma took care of the bouquets, and once or twice she would ask me to help, but it was something that she loved to do so much that I didn't feel bad that she did that for us. And now that I'm living in my own house, I do my best to take care of my bouquets and make sure that they're looking as good as I feel. And the last memory that came to mind is when I was working at NCC, and I came across this book, and Grandma had mentioned it so many times to me, so I bought it, and I read it, and I loved it. It was so good. And I was telling my friends that, this book, Grandma told me to read it. And then I realized as I said that, she had never told me to read that book. She had pointed to it, or if it was on the counter, she would tap it and say, this is such a good book. But she never said, Bella, you should read this book. She just said, it's so good. And that was a revelation for me as I thought about it, because I realized that almost everything I learned from Grandma, she didn't tell me to do it. She did it, and because she did it, I wanted to do it. She didn't give me advice to follow. She had so much advice that she could have given me. But really, my memories of her is what she did, and watching her living and taking care of children and just existing. And she inspired me to do that as well. And I think Grandma had learned that you can't change people, but you can inspire them. So she and Grandpa inspired me to pray and read the Bible daily with my future spouse. And she inspired me to take care of the flowers in my house, and she showed me how, but she never told me I should. She just did it, and I wanted to do it too.
Yes, and I spent a lot of time over at Grandma and Grandpa's house. As I got older and I, went off to work and eventually to university, I found myself wandering around grocery stores thinking, what on earth am I going to bring to Thanksgiving? And I would, end up calling Grandma, and I would have these extended conversations with her in the grocery store, or walking around my, university dorm, or kind of in these random places. Probably after it was after my grandfather died. I remember calling her and thinking, you know what, there are sometimes people pass in your life and you don't get to say the things that you want to say to them. And I remember calling her and telling her and just saying, you know what, I don't know how much longer you're going to be around, but I want to make sure that you hear these things. And I just said how much you mean to me, how much she's modeled leadership in my life, and what it means to be a godly person.
So I rolled into town, and there was a bunch of stuff waiting at my parents' house, and one was I'd inherited the board game book. I was going to bring it, and it's too big to make. And it just brought up memories of, we would, I don't know how many hundreds of times we played the giant board game book. Anyway, I think about playing games with my grandparents, and they were very good company.
Yeah.
Good job.
Uncle Art. Uncle Art's here, and he's just, he's going to share a little bit now from Kamloops. And Aunt Elsie. And Aunt Elsie's here too.
Art is the only sibling of Margaret's family that's here today. Henry was not able to come, and Mary, she vacillated back and forth, but she's in Kamloops with us, but she was not able to come today also.
And Margaret left a very large footprint.
Yes, she did.
And she's amazing. I was very privileged to be able to be her little brother. She was 5 when I was born. And in a railway tie house, and there was 9 children. And I would say who I am today is largely responsible for my little big sister, Margaret. She was a romantic. She loved to have flowers everywhere. Her bathroom was always filled with flowers. And she said, well, let's go to Berg's. We'll get that ring that you're going to get. So she helped me pick it out. And interestingly, it was a white gold, which I had never heard of. Oh, she said, that would be real nice. And I think she would really like a solitaire. So when I gave it to Elsie, she said, hey, that's amazing. That's the one I was hoping for, was a white solitaire. Last week, the day that Margaret passed, I was keeping in touch quite closely with Rick and family. Margaret was very, very close to me. And so roughly at 4 o'clock we talked and said, yeah, it's winding down. And so I went and relaxed in the sunroom. Oh yeah, and before we got off the phone, I felt this impulse. Tell Rick to say goodbye to Margaret for me. And I said, she might not hear you, but her spirit will. So then he left. I mean, the phone left. I got off the phone and I was relaxing in the couch and I looked up and there was a picture of Margaret. Just right there on the wall. And it wasn't in color or anything, it was just there. And then it was gone. Yeah. So it was like, you know, it's one of those little gifts I felt God gave me for her to come and say goodbye. Yeah. And that was special, that was very special. And that's 63 years ago that they got that stone, by the way. Wow. Yeah, great story.
Well, 46 years ago, almost, I married into the Bergen family. And it didn't take long to realize that one of the perks of being part of the family was having Margaret Bergen as your aunt. Auntie Margaret had a sense of modesty that we appreciated, and it was rather humorous to see that her print of the Mona Lisa that was on the wall had a slightly higher neckline than the original did. But I want to share one particular story. We were invited over for dinner and came into the house, and the table was beautifully set and it smelled delicious. And so I popped into the kitchen to see if I could just help with the last bits of dinner prep and maybe getting supper on the table. And I realized quickly that dinner actually had not been started. Auntie Margaret poured me a cup of coffee, and with a little twinkle in her eye, she said, the magic is if you forget to take something out of the freezer, or if you're falling behind or whatever you do, set the table, make a pot of coffee, and fry an onion. Everybody will be reassured that dinner is on its way. It might be a little bit late, but everybody's comfortable with that. And I have no idea what we ate for supper that night, but I'm sure it was yummy, and I know it was served with love.
Yeah, amen.
And Uncle George and Aunt Margaret, they had a very interesting relationship, and it worked so well. Uncle George was in the hold of the ship, making sure that it stayed a steady course and that the engines kept running. And Aunt Margaret was on the upper deck at the celebration buffet. And everybody wanted to be on that cruise.
Because my mom roomed with Margaret in Bible school. So they became good friends, and that's how my mom married my dad, because my dad was Margaret's brother. My dad is Henry Thiessen, so he was the brother next to Auntie Margaret. So that's why she is now Auntie Margaret. So when I wanted to buy a cheap dress for grade 12 graduation, he gave me the job pruning and cutting back the raspberry plants so that I can earn money to buy a better one. You were right. Graduation was a big event, and I was grateful to be dressed appropriately.
Auntie Margaret would show me her roses and other plants around the yard, explain that it was just so simple. You just put it in the dirt and you let it grow, and if that doesn't work, you just move it to another place and keep trying, no rules. From time to time, she would show up at our home when I was growing up and to help my mother with a quick tidy or a meal, whatever needed to be done. It was always just a lick and a promise. That was her words. Something that took me years to accomplish, but a gift I have been grateful to learn. Sometimes it's better just to do a bit than nothing at all.
I'm Sandy Thiessen, and Stan Thiessen's wife, obviously. Oh, come on over, I have soup and buns ready. And to top it off, she would tell me to go put my feet up in the living room and have a nice cup of tea while she would play magic fun games with our kids. We all loved her so much, and we loved going to Auntie Margaret's and Uncle George's.
Okay, so I'm another one of those NKs that got to live at Mark's place for a year. I don't think I was an easy child.
My name is Ruth, and I live here in Abbotsford, and I'm I'm Aunt Margaret's aunt, and my mom and dad's name is Jake and Mary Thiessen. Anyways, Aunt Margaret was really close, like a second mom.
Hi, my name's Donna. I'm Ruth's daughter. Jake and Mary Thiessen were my grandparents. Aunt Margaret was kind of like a second grandma to me. Growing up, I didn't really have cousins that lived close to me, and so I didn't really think much of it back then. But I think Aunt Margaret and Uncle George would invite us over a lot of times, and we hung out with a lot of their grandchildren. When my mom was diagnosed with cancer in, I think it was 2005 or 6, there was a time where, when she was going through her chemotherapy, Aunt Margaret had us stay over because my dad was working nights, and so she said to come on over, and my mom needed taken care of, and so we actually, for I think a week or 2, we stayed over there, and she got bedrooms ready for us, and she drove us to school while my mom rested at their place. So that was really special.
So I grew up on a dairy farm. I'm Roger, Art Thiessen, the youngest of Margaret's youngest brother. Specifically looking for a wife, and I shared some of my frustrations with Margaret. She was fun to visit with. And Auntie Margaret also shared her frustrations about Henry and Rick. They're not even trying. I don't know if they're ever going to get married. At least you'll be fine. You'll find a wife. You're trying. It was fun.
I'm Jake's son, Bernie, and the one thing that Aunt Margaret said to me a few years ago, and I remembered each time I get a call from my younger daughter, who has 5 kids, just go do what you can.
Wow. That was Margaret.